based on actual quality researches. That's why we cooperate with Center of Economic Research and other Ukrainian think tanks who are joining or in development of such policy. This particular research is an example of drafting strategies, and we will be ready to support such efforts. Thank you for very brief introduction. And I want to add that currently the issue of improving the efficiency of both internal and external control is important because almost 50% of Ukrainian budget is coming from external sources. And I'm very grateful to the authors of the research for preparing this research. And I want to pass the floor to Yuriy Gaidai, Senior Economist of CR. And for thank you, Alexandra. The presentation, Yuriy, we cannot hear you properly. Maybe some settings of the sound. My colleagues, Viktor Maziarchuk and Olena Makeyeva, will do the presentation. I will just briefly speak about the framework of this research, because by inertia, we still think that state internal control is still accepted as revisional or an system that has repressional function that should react to some requests of government bodies and to check something that was already been not functioning. But we should move to the system of quality control that is accepted in the corporate world, because such systems, they aim efficiency, not keeping to the procedures or like, let's say we're talking about the laws and procedural documents, but yes, of course, they are the guidelines to implement them, but efficiency is the primary KPI. That's why it's important to introduce proper risk assessments, not and businesses and state during the war, they cannot allow to disperse their resources to everything and to lose them. And that's why quality risk assessment can allow us to concentrate on things that are really important. Internal audits in this system, it's not something that punishes people, but it's internal partner of the operational functions of the system. Partner, it means that internal control is able professionally and trustfully conduct dialogue with operational departments. It should be able to discover risks, and this much easier and faster can be done if your partner who is doing that is trustworthy and do action on events that really will help. And of course, we're talking about such things as saving certain expenses. Yeah, and like for state, the primary beneficiary of state funding budget is people. And here the accounting chamber steps in, and its functions are important. This is a body that is functioning under the parliament, and if all these elements are working in a trusty manner, this what brings flexibility and stability to the state. So risks better to be prevented rather than mitigated. And I pass the floor to Alexandra and my colleagues. Thank you, Yuriy. I want to introduce Olena Makeyeva, head of the Council of Directors of Audit Company Aksonova and Partners, and Olena will tell us about the departments of internal control in different ministries and about DASU. And recently, we are very pleased to have news from the Ministry of Defense about how the internal audit is working and how they're mitigating those issues. And I believe Olena will tell us much more on that and what should be done. Thank you, colleagues. Very glad to be part of this discussion today. I hope it will be very professional. That's because yeah, it's always nice to meet with the colleague professionals. I, our presentation is on the screen. Can you see it? Yes, Olena, maybe you switch to the presentation mode. On the bottom of the screen, yeah, yes, at the bottom near the Zoom bar. I'm trying to, yes, yeah. Colleagues, firstly, I want to say that this presentation should be viewed in conjunction with the report. We put only key recommendations and our notices from the report, but in more detail with statistical numbers, with information, with function, with recommendations. You should check that from the report. So our presentation is an essential part of our larger report document. Number two, I want to say that at the basis of our report and presentations, we put not only our team's thoughts, but also we took into account recommendations of the recommendation EFPM and guidelines of Sigma Analytical Center that was founded by OECD and European Union, and they are working on governance improvement and management improvement. And also we considered a report 2023 that was presented on November 8th in 2023, and it's recommended to start negotiations with EU for Ukraine. And we also took into account the latest Sigma research that was presented on the 6th of December 2023. We studied a large number of documents and analysis papers and expert opinions. We that was the basis for our recommendations for the further reforms in Ukraine. Our presentation will consist of the current situation of the state internal financial control, key recommendations. We will briefly talk about internal control, internal audit. We will talk about the function of the State Audit Service, how efficient it is. We will talk about cooperation and exchange of information. This part is very important, in my opinion, because if we can establish proper exchange of information between all authorities of state internal control and with accounting chamber, and if this would be a quality and reliable exchange of the right information, it will decrease the number of the checks of the and the quality of those checks and audits would be much higher. Let's talk about general presentation of the current situation. These are our observations, not only our, and third-party experts who are working on the state financial management areas. We've seen quite a few reforms in Ukraine. First of all, it's about reform of internal control. So there was Soviet Union heritage in internal control, and Ukraine achieved a considerable progress in implementing the three components of the internal control. So we have the internal control is based on the course international concept. It includes 5 interrelated components. All state authorities, state companies, and organizations that are obliged to introduce internal control according to the COSOM concept, they did that. And they did that while taking into account all these 5 key interrelated components: so internal environment, risk management, or shift management and monitoring. And every year, uh, these organizations report to the Ministry of Finance on the internal, on these 5 elements according to COSOM, and they report to Ministry of Finance. On other hand, Cabinet of Ministers approved the procedure on conducting internal audit number 1001, like for central government bodies, regional administrations. There were considerable investments in implementing international audit standards to train public officers, and Ministry of Finance has publicized a lot of materials, educational materials on those issues. And today we will be conducting a workshop for state oblast administrations on how internal audit units should function. So we have a legal framework, we have in place people responsible for that, but we see some issues with staffing of these units, or maybe not always organizations understand how important the activity are the activities of these bodies of internal control. And so a lack of staff, lack of understanding from the management of importance of the work of internal audits, this what makes the efficiency of internal audit is decreasing. We have we have also Department of Harmonization of State Internal Financial Control, and this department annually prepares a comprehensive report on the conditions of state internal financial control and publishes it on the website of Ministry of Finance. And we have a 4-structure centralized body, State Audit Service, which we inherited from Soviet Union, and they are in charge of inspections and financial control. I would say that this function of internal financial control remained in other European countries for quite a long time, but with time its importance faded away, and very few countries we have now in EU that retain this function. The global tendency goes to decentralization and increasing the importance of the internal audit units, and increasing the importance of work of the accounting chambers. Let's talk about key recommendations from our side. What we recommend to, in line with further reforms on SIFC. As I mentioned, we analyzed not only documents and procedures and reports, but we also worked in cooperation with other experts and took into account reports of IPEP, Ukraine 2023, Sigma assessments, and others. Let's talk about key recommendations. We need to continue further transition from centralized control and inspection of State Audit Service to the decentralized audit according to SIFC model. We need to properly distinguish tasks and functions of financial inspections of the activities that are conducted by the departments of internal audit, and we should not duplicate functions of State Audit Service with the functions of internal audit, or they shouldn't clash with each other. State Audit Service should enhance departments of internal audit, and and decrease its role to be focused on more important aspects, such as investigations of suspected financial misuse, or so. In many countries where this function is still existing, such bodies, they check the funds provided by EU.
As the Sigma instructions recommend us, the financial inspection should not have any delegated or regional offices because it might create some threats, for example, interference into activity of the departments of State Audit Service, and we should also focus upon the mandate of the State Audit Service. And as for today, State Audit Service has the network of institutions of the has the department units of the State Audit Service, more than 2,000 of them, more than 2,000 such units. Very many institutions being checked by the State Audit Service, and the role of the State Audit Service should get more and more limited, and the role of the departments of the units of the internal audit and their role, their mandate should get expanded. And let's come to our recommendations. And as for State Audit Service, it should implement a risk-oriented approach, a risk management approach, first of all. And second of all, State Audit Service should prioritize its activity, prioritize accordingly by the material merit of the case. And we should be oriented upon big fish, and we should act accordingly to this principle, so-called big fish. And the State Audit Service should follow this principle as well. And the State Audit Service should also understand its administrative capacity, how qualitatively it can work, because quality is the key if we speak about this management of state budget and state finances. As for today, State Audit Service has the wide range of the units and departments which are mandatory, obligatory, especially if we speak about their requests. For example, assignments, proposals, etc. Very many institutions offering such assignments, requests, and suggestions. But we believe that efficiently the State Audit Service can work only when it stays under the control of the Cabinet of Ministers under the Ministry of Finance. And once it was implemented, we have such successful experience. For example, for 2020, we had such an audit, and we also have been checking this for the expenditures for COVID-19, and we should use such approach when conducting financial checkups as for the state finances, and this way procedure will be the most efficient. And our next recommendation, the concept of risk-oriented selection by State Audit Service, it should be updated and approved. As for today, this concept-oriented approach, and which was approved in 2014, now it's been reorganized. But those recommendations and the concept, now it's out of date, and still it's been in force. Now this is the subject for discussion, and this is the way we do this selection, for example. And if we speak about the concept of risk-oriented selection, and we should work upon this. And methodological council was reorganized, and now it does not exist anymore. Now it's out of date. It's not objective. And to our mind, we should update our procedures. It should meet It should follow those international best practices, and we should get rid of the human factor, and we should get rid of that image of punishment institution that punishes. Unfortunately, State Audit Service doesn't have that positive image, at least in media. And then our next recommendation, the financial checkups of the State Audit Service, and State Audit Service should cooperate with the internal audit institutions. The State Audit Service does not have the procedure in place as for cooperation with other state bodies, as and we should speak that not only the law enforcement and not only the executive um, bodies should provide information. We should have good communication on all of the levels, especially if we speak about the legislative level in Ukraine. According to the legislation, the workers of the State Audit Service units should immediately report upon fraud or abuse cases. But nevertheless, only by the decision of the chief of the institution, the decision is taken whether to submit such cases to law enforcement bodies. And in case when the chief of the department of the State Audit Service is dependent on the chief of the institution, for example, the bonuses is counted and appointed by the chief of the State Audit Service, for example, or the unit of the State Audit Service, then it would be not efficient. So the efficiency of investigating such cases of fraud or abuse or corruption, then this rate of investigation isn't of a poor quality. And nevertheless, in our case, we mentioned this, and we have offered the examples of some of the countries where more or less this issue is regulated, and we believe that the State Audit Service under work does not meet all the needs, does not progress as for such cases, does not progress as for the procedure for such cases of fraud and abuse. And the next point, the major part of all of the events of the financial control of the State Audit Service, it deals with the monitoring of procurements. We have the progressive system for this online procurements system, and we have tracked the efficiency of such checks monitoring of the procurements. It's very low. We have it in our report in details with the figures, but it's not only our point of view. The same evaluation and assessment we have in the latest report by Sigma, presented in December 2023, and Sigma experts also mentioned that this poor efficiency of the monitoring the procurement system is about the fact that the state needs the new strategy of state procurement, and the Ministry of Economy deals with this, with the development of the strategy, and this strategy also deals with revising the risk-oriented approach applied now. For example, if we speak about the risk indicators in place, and if the indicators works alarms, then the State Audit Service comes. But it's not only our observation that the major part of all of the events by the events of financial control by State Audit Service and now of poor quality and is of low efficiency. We have not checked the internal control as for the bodies, state authorities. We have not tracked the internal documents, the way the documents work, the way they are formulated, but we and Sigma have mentioned that the legislative base for building internal control and audit in Ukraine, and now it's in place. It was established, created, but as for internal control, it's the risk monitoring system is not that much efficient. It's under efficient, so it should be improved. And the focus of attention should be upon improving the quality, and we should be result oriented. and the role of the department in harmonizing the public internal financial control. And here we should also speak about the Ministry of Finance, as it does not receive the information about does not receive information about the number of events, maybe only the statistics information about the number, but there is no analytical information, no information to be analyzed and to produce some report. So this is kind of a statistic form template that it's not informative to the Ministry of the Finances. It's not enough to analyze how efficiently the State Audit Service functions. And to our point, this subject to analysis and monitoring should be not only the statistics report, but also the report of the units and departments of the State Audit Service. It's important to regularly have meetings with the chiefs of the units of the State Audit Service to discuss it with them, to discuss some issues with them, problems they faced. We should ask them to their mind what doesn't work, what are the obstacles and challenges. We should have the ongoing dialogue between the departments, between the Ministry of Finances and departments of the State Audit Service together to elaborate the events and to enhance the activity of the department of the State Audit Service, to understand what are the needs in the field, to understand how to improve the activity of the internal audit specialist and events. As I have mentioned, by the latest updates as for Sigma, most of the principles of evaluation of the state management in all the areas, but for some issues it's in place and the internal audit function is in place. You can see the scores, they are pretty high, and you can see them in the tables. But nevertheless, there are some recommendations. We have already mentioned them. As for internal control, we should increase our risk management activity. We should improve it. And the most important, what we mentioned in the recommendations and instructions by Sigma, internal audit and the function of the financial checks as for State Audit Service, they should not be duplicated. They should enhance each other. And in short, about this, which is the State Audit Service of Ukraine, the State Audit Service is the central body of the executive body, central body of the executive power in the form of inspection, the activity which is aimed at coordinating the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine through the Minister of Finances of Ukraine. And the role of State Audit Service should be rather getting limited, and the internal audit capacity should be more and more improved and developed. And we should extend that pool of the institutions that should have the right to give some assignments to the State Audit Service. For example, this should not go just like should not like get assignment and go and check, but the State Audit Service should apply the risk-oriented approach. It should by itself evaluate and assess whether there was the violation, the offense, or maybe just like a reason to check something out of nothing, as it happens with some of the, for example, state law enforcement bodies. And each assignment request should be checked, even though it comes from the law enforcement bodies. We should apply the risk-oriented approach. We should take into consideration the material merit and the capacity of the State Audit Service. But it's better if we had one single body to run the activity of the State Audit Service, to state the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. It should gradually, we don't speak it should be done today, but step by step, the role of the State Audit Service should be getting more and more limited. The concept of risk-oriented selection, it's out of date. It was approved in 2014, and not all of the events are planned using this out-of-date concept. There is much of the subjectiveness when checking the facilities for control. The State Audit Service holds different audits, inspections, revisions, checkups, and checkups as for and monitoring as for state procurements and for state audit and planned inspections or revision. Here the risk-oriented planning is used and it's mandatory. And as for the rest of the events and activities, the State Audit Service does not apply this risk-oriented approach. And we should emphasize that this concept should be revised, amended, it should be legally proved and developed accordingly to the best international practices. As far as it's possible, it should be automatized for us to get rid of this human factor and for this institution not to be considered as the punishment institution. As I have mentioned, we have four types of control. Most of all, we were analyzing 2020, 2022, and you can see the results in the table. And we have, as for the monitoring of the procurements, 86.91%. If comparing to the state financial audits, 1.2%, and inspections or revisions, 3.8%. And the staff, more than 3,000 people are the staff members of the State Audit Service, and the State Audit Service can hire using some employment contracts, can make contracts and hire another employers. But about 3,000 people is this now the staff as for the State Audit Service, and now as for now 20% in this is the result as for understaffing as for the State Audit Service. And here we can observe the lack of staff members to fulfill all of its functions. So you can check the reports, you can find information about the other countries who still have preserved the State Audit Service, and the number of the staff workers there, not more than 200 people. They have there such amount of people. So as for now, we have 3,000 people, and it seems to be it must be more than enough, but we should speak about the efficiency, how much time we spend monitoring the procurements. And this is what makes difference. If we speak about indicators of risk, if those indicators are so high, and then the function of the State Audit Service should be aimed at checking those procurements. Maybe there is something wrong with the risk-oriented approach. Probably there is an issue. Probably we should fix it, and we should also keep it in mind. And the State Audit Service, as I've mentioned before, plans its controlling activities only for inspections, planned ones, because there are those beyond the schedule. And the State Audit Service legally makes plans for quotas, schedules quotas by quarter. We understand how much time it takes to plan, to make this plan. And if we apply correctly the risk-oriented approach, that planning should be for a longer term perspective. So it works well in other countries. For example, procurement monitoring is planned for a year, and those countries where they still have this function in place. And it was unfortunately we don't have time. Yes, I have almost finished. And Sigma assessment mentions that State Audit Service has the same functions just as the internal audit, and this duplication shouldn't be the case. That is why we recommend. We have compared the financial control of State Audit Service and the internal audit. We have presented this in this slide. So you're welcome to check this and look through in the report. And also for sometimes the external monitoring and audit is obligatory. For example, we have now the reform of audit. The independent audit reforming has taken place, and we have now a special authority to be in charge of those controls and monitorings. And sometimes here we have the table representing some overlap in between the financial control and the internal audit activities, and it should be analyzed to our point, we believe, and we should somehow overcome this. And last point I would like to mention, as for information exchange, and as for now, internally. As I have mentioned, that the units of the State Audit Service do not have proper contact with the State Audit Service, with each other, and they do not have the communication with the units of the internal audit. And that is why we should improve communication to avoid the duplications and to make those monitorings and checks of the high quality for them to offer the complete work and complete activity, completing each other's gaps. And the Ministry of Finances, we have this information in details in the report. Probably we should expand, we should find another tools to build the information exchange for efficient communication between the department, the Ministry of Finances, and the departments of the internal audit, maybe somehow to enhance its their activity and to understand what are the problems and what should be fixed, what we should elaborate to enhance and decentralize our today centralized state audit service. So somehow to turn into a very powerful audit service. Now it's over to Viktor, and we come to accounting chamber. Thank you so much. And before giving it over to Viktor, on the website, we have the presentation.
There is a presentation of this research on our website. Please visit it, and because the research is much more detailed, Viktor Maziarchuk, Head of the Center of Research of Fiscal Policies. Good day, colleagues. I will be very brief on the basic and key points. So what's important? Important that there is crossing of responsibility between the State Audit Service and the Accounting Chamber, and these overlaps should be removed. And our international colleagues mentioned this necessity of changing certain legal documents and regulations. It's important that the law on accounting chambers mentions financial audits and audits of efficiency, and so we have to improve our legislation on risk-oriented audits. And our next slide. Let's talk about analytics. We collected data on the quality of collecting data. We asked accounting chambers about all suggestions of the members of accounting chamber, and we're very grateful to them because we saw that there is a great issue on the quality of planning of their activities. Like maybe so it's the biggest issue is to record the facts. So because annual plan is able to include only 2/3 of suggestions of the member of the accounting chamber. So 10% of it are changes to the plan, and very small are suggestions from other organizations. Like usually these are suggestions from people's deputies, and there are unscheduled compulsory audits that accounting chambers is obliged to do. The biggest issue is that suggestions provided by the members of accounting chambers, they don't have quality reasoning to them. So this is biggest issue. In order to show you other aspect of the quality of planning, in the suggestions members of accounting chambers, we're analyzing years 19 to 23. They plan the date of beginning and end of their audit. We compared plan dates and actual dates, and we see that there is quite significant difference. Almost 40% of only 40% of all audits are conducting according to the planned period of when they were supposed to be conducted. So there was no differences between planned period and actual period of when they were conducted. So what we should uh, conclude from this, we need to um, exercise more discipline among the members of the accounting chambers. So because the average period of delays between a planned and actual uh, finish of the audit is 4 months. Yes, delays in approving reports and in implementing reports significantly increase the duration of the audit. 100% of all audits are supposed to be finalized within 6 months. If we look at the chart, we can compare the scheduled deadline to finalize it and actual one. So only 2/3 of audits are being finalized in time. What does it mean? It means that the duration from the from the very beginning, the accounting chamber members should be realistic in assigning duration of the audits. Yeah, they should understand that something might go wrong, and they should understand that they lack staff, and this will increase the duration of the audit. Yeah, delays with conducting audit, and it subsequently delay any future audits because people are being assigned to particular audit procedures. And when a person is still occupied with previous audit, that person is not able to start next scheduled event. Here, I want to show like quite interesting situation when, according to the requirements of the accounting chamber procedure, they should submit their suggestions with including risks and groundings. We checked where the members of the accounting chamber conduct risks. Very few, and you see from the results that very few members continuously and systematically uh, give reasoning to the suggestions, and this all uh, uh, takes a toll on the quality of the audits because when auditors are not able to fully research issue of audit, yeah, that it means the quality of the audit drops, and it also decreases the capabilities of the audit chamber at the audit level to function properly. And next slide shows how were approved audits. Those audits that had risk assessments like in various years, and we see that proportionally situation is improving, but we still see very low quality of the audits that have reasoning and uh, risk assessments. It shows a problem, but it also at the same time shows opportunities for accounting chambers to improve its efficacy when they will be planning their next period of activities. And we also assessed areas that were audit. Yes, there were 20 policies of the governments, and according to them, uh, we see a disproportion in that certain areas are very oftenly audit, and certain areas are audited much less frequently. This factor should be taken into the consideration when accounting chamber is preparing its plan for the next year, for example. Next slide, please. Yes, no, please, next one. We are short of time. Okay, monitoring. Let's talk about monitoring. Issues of monitoring is of the recommendation of the counting chambers. Some of them remain uh, unimplemented or being implemented formally. That's why the because of the quality of the recommendations is very low. They can be such things that don't pursue very particular deadline. They might be very poorly formulated, broadly formulated. So auditors who are preparing a report should should work on that. Next slide, please. Important uh, issue is staff. Human resources are key for the function of the accounting chambers, and we see that in 2023 they were supposed to increase number of auditors and uh, uh, but there are still a lot of vacancies remaining open in state audit chamber. Almost a third of vacant positions. Uh, uh, that's very prominent factor. Yes, I will skip the next slide. Political issues, appointment and resignation of members. This is function of the parliament. We need to say words of thanks to the Miss Chairman, because the competition of appointing accounting chamber members was transparent, and there were transparent criteria for each candidate, and so all I will finalize, and that's all from me. Thank you very much. She was very brief and very professional, and I want to pass the floor to Miss Roksolana Pidlasa, uh, head of the Budget Committee of Parliament of Ukraine. I wanted to ask you your opinion because we are participating in the working group that you uh, initiated. What's your opinion about this research? And maybe you tell us more about the draft laws that you are working on now. The Budget Committee doesn't have uh, not that much of uh, foundational acts of legislation. Like we only have five of them, and two of them are the law on the accounting chamber and on the foundations of the financial control. And I hope we will be very soon start reforming State Audit Service. We should uh, uh, involve government to this reform, and because they are the authority that is most interested in reforming it. Accounting chamber, it's a body of audit that conducts control over the use of budget funds on behalf of the parliament. That's what Constitution said. But apparently, when it was put into the Constitution, people were very little aware about the functions of the accounting chambers, and that's why the current reform of the accounting chamber is a persistent issue because we have very low score on uh, um, integrating our legislation to a key control, so that we have 2 out of 5, and our progress is almost non-existent. That's why, on my behalf, what we can say we can do in budget committee is to adopt a new law on accounting chamber or changes to the law. If we be very precise, we have suggestions from the G7 countries that they provided very clear vision on what should be done in this reform. and all these changes to the law are based on the report of the European Commissions, on the report on compliance with Chapter 32. We will remove crossing of responsibilities between State Audit Service and Accounting Chamber. There are a lot of discussions on how to do this, but State Audit Service are not participating often in these discussions because I believe they're important stakeholder in this process and they should be more involved in that. And we have an initiative group on changes to the law on accounting chambers. We had 6 meetings of this working group. We plan to continue this working group until we finalize the committee's draft on the law 044D. So we have draft law 044 and alternative. Every draft law has comments on this from the stakeholders, starting from our Parliament's internal department and Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Economy. So we want to prepare a law that will more or less to be a compromise. I cannot promise that all stakeholders will be happy, but at least it will be compliant to the requirements of our international partners, and it should make accounting chamber stronger and more efficient in areas they're responsible for. So, we discussed a lot the issue of payment remuneration in the accounting chamber. According to international standards, it should be 70% from the fixed one. So we will recommend to increase the salaries to the accounting chamber workers, because currently situation is that majority of the funds of salary fund is being done by the bonuses, and this is a discretional measure. And for example, if members of the accounting chamber will try to ostracize one of the members, they can deprive him of the bonuses, and it will be like only 20,000 hryvnia, or like 50, 60. But when we talk about the highest body audit in the state that should check actions of ministers and top management, we should understand that they should be paid adequately, and the pay shouldn't be dependent on such person's relations with the cabinet of ministers, with the chairman of the accounting chambers, because independence should be granted not only from the parliament, but also independence should be maintained between the members of the accounting chambers. But I deviated a little bit, because indeed during our meetings we discussed a broad scope of questions. During some issues were approved without discussions. For example, that it should be provisioned that accounting chamber always acts based on the international principles. We need to increase coordination of accounting chambers activities with parliament. I think that most largest reports should be heard in the relevant parliamentary committee, not only in the budget committee. Accounting chamber should introduce transparent mechanism of monitoring of their recommendations, and the results of such monitoring should be considered in relevant committees. We should divide the responsibilities of State Audit Service and Accounting Chamber. We will devote a separate mm, meeting to that issue in order to achieve the recommendations of the European Union and to, on other hand, not to deprive State Audit Service from very important functions that are enabling us to control efficiently state funds. Of course, we spoke about risk-oriented approach when preparing annual plan of the accounting chamber, and a lot of things that are shown in the presentations are very true. That's why our yes, uh, um, we have active members of our working group, both from Ukrainian stakeholders and international stakeholders, and I've invited other organizations and experts to join us. Uh, we have our meetings every week. We're working online, and we always ready ready to hear new suggestions. You know, we we have our discussion lasts uh, at least 1 to 2 hours, and please welcome and thank you for your presentation.
And thank you so much. I would like to give it over, first of all, to Ms. Olha Pishchanska, head of the Accounting Chamber of Ukraine. She is the head as the result of the transparent contest Viktor has mentioned. And here I would like also to mention that I've noticed from what Viktor has mentioned, very much can be improved now without the amendments to the legislation. These are the internal procedures of the accounting chamber, and those recommendations Viktor has mentioned, probably they are up to date, probably out of date. What's your point of view? What is your progress? How to improve the efficiency of audits? How to decrease the risk of poor quality monitorings and estimations? First of all, thank you so much for conducting this audit. Thank you for providing this monitor and this check and assessment for our State Audit Service. This is the highest body checking ministers, now the bodies and authorities, and quite often it's very useful to see our activity from another side, to see it from another perspective, to have the reports on what we have not paid attention before. And as for those findings provided to us, it was difficult not to pay attention to them, but nevertheless, I would like also to add that we agreed to the major part of the findings. We have the same visions and perspectives and insights. As for today, we can see really great progress as for the activities to improve our activity. And a part of them have already been implemented, some of them are in progress, and we have some terms as how to regulate this. And I should agree with you that as for the most of the recommendations and findings, to improve the activity of our State Audit Service. I agree with you what we should improve. We actively work as for this, separately as for, and we are separately the members of the working group as for the reform of the accounting chamber. And as for today, we also continue our activity. It will be ongoing, no matter how long the reform will take. And I would like one by one, would like to answer those questions and issues from the findings and from your report. As for today, we have already approved the procedures of the audits, those prescribed by InterSign, and the methodologies. Using those methodologies, we can implement the audits, conduct and hold the audits, and have the reports. They now have another format, another template, another type of recommendations, another sorts of recommendations. Those recommendations should be clear, and those recommendations should be those applicable, not decorative, but applicable. And as an example, I would like to mention in advance that some of the reports were approved. So there was the roundtable in Verkhovna Rada, and this is another level of cooperation with Verkhovna Rada. This is the report as for reforming the coal industry. And now we are expecting the date of the second roundtable, which is supposed to be devoted not to the problems of the not those issues that we had because of non-implementation of the reform of the coal, as for the coal industry. But here we speak about the reform being on another level, how to drive it on another level. As for planning, late last year, we had the procedures for strategic and annual planning, and we believe that the newly appointed members of the accounting chamber, indeed, we have some under improvements, and as it was mentioned in the diagram, the major part, the biggest part of the audits are implemented within 6 to 7 months. We should take this into consideration as some average indicator. What it means? What does it mean? It means that we cannot form the plan neither in a quarterly way, neither for half a year. We should have the resources identified a year ahead. We should have clear plans, designs, schedules as for leaves and so on, and having strategic planning for 5 years. Then, and in annual planning, we can make some amendments. And this activity was implemented. We have launched implementing such activities. So we should have the annual plan for this next year, where we should apply risk-oriented approaches. We should also have the strategy, and we should take it into consideration. We should analyze the segments to identify the directions, fields, areas which are the most useful for audits to be conducted. And this activity has been in progress, and I don't have the intention to say that we have the properly improved planning. I should mention that indeed we don't have this base. We have some of it, but not as for all of the events and activities. We can improve it. And as for today, we try to improve our activity. As for audit areas, I believe that it's not reasonable to have regular audit as for all of the areas of politics. There are some areas that are more of the most critical importance for budget, for state. That is why more attention should be focused to some of the areas by the accounting chamber. But we should have this clear justification why it is so. We should take into consideration this risk oriented approach, and so for us not to have any issues or questions raised as for this, and we will take into consideration your recommendations. I also had it in my previous letter that was considered by as for me being a candidate. So I had a letter as a candidate. I have sent it, and it was considered. And we should have everything carefully and accurately stated. We should have some precise amount of the activities and audits, but the time periods, the action plan points should be mentioned before giving any recommendation. We, as the members and the apparatus of the accounting chamber, we should understand what we expect, what our expectations are, how the recommendations are expected to be fulfilled, and we should understand how to understand whether this or that activity is fulfilled or not. As for this, we also have in the methodology another paragraph or chapter. There are the requirements to the recommendations, how they should look like. in this format, we also should have some elaborations as for the monitoring. We have the automatized system of monitoring of the fulfillment of the recommendation of the accounting chamber. This is one of the most important goals of the chamber, of accounting chamber, because we should not waste really huge resource of the state if we don't understand totally whether something is going on here or not, if we cannot assess, evaluate the results, the achievements, and if we do not respond to this, if our, for example, recommendations are not fulfilled, then we should understand what should be done for those recommendations. For example, there should be the justification why the recommendation was not fulfilled, otherwise some measures should be taken. As for staffing of apparatus, it's not less important than the number of the members of the accounting chamber, the number of the staffing, the expertise of the staff members. This is the core of the accounting chamber and the key goals as for the accounting chamber. Ms. Roksolana has mentioned this, and we should offer the increased expanded empowerment, but we need to improve the quality, the expertise of the auditors, and by means of the wage salary, it's impossible to do it this way, neither in short term nor in long term perspective. So discussing this at the meetings, we have been discussing this. We should have conditions that should be offered to audit workers. If we speak about the historical events, it's difficult for me now to comment on this. We still have some plans, and we are considering how to conduct, how to hold this assessment or evaluation of the expertise of the staffing of the chamber to identify in details what trainings are required to the auditors. For example, if we have gaps in some areas, how to fix them, we should understand this. As for appointments, it's not my level decisions. As for controlling the the accounting chamber and control, as for Verkhovna Rada, we should cooperate with Cabinet of Ministers, with Verkhovna Rada, and it's indicated in the legislation. And as for the working group meetings, we also had those discussions. I will not discuss this. It was mentioned before by the head of the budget committee. And improvements as for our activity, we have already some improvements in place and implemented. I've mentioned already the report from the accounting chamber. We should work in this area for the OMA, not simply send within 15 days, but to cooperate with the specialized committees to have meetings, roundtable discussions, and get some reports, and then we can have some tools how to improve our activity. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Very interesting. And while you were speaking, especially with the end, you mentioned that as for appointments, it's, for example, countdown as for Viktor Maziarchuk in Facebook, who went here, writes that he has this legitimacy countdown in Facebook. So it's another challenge. What you should do with this, it's another challenge, because the G7 also agreed that the contest and should be transparent and according to the new legislation, but we don't have the draft law. That is why, especially you have, and we all have very great challenges. And now I would like to give it over to Dmytro Shevchuk, Deputy Chairman of the State Audit Service of Ukraine. And in short, today we've heard that the role of State Audit Service should be limited, restricted. We should move from decentralization towards decentralization, and the sewage of the State Audit Service should cooperate with the internal audit bodies and authorities and to implement the risk-oriented approach. It's to be short. Probably you would like to respond to some of the points. Thank you so much for the reports, findings. Thank you for all of the job done. We should increase the GDP. It's important, but let's analyze how it works in practice. For example, decrease, increase something. What is our goal? What tools do we have? when preparing this report, very many offers were mentioned, but I like doing something with my own hands manually to understand how it works in practice. For example, there was this, for example, the overlapping the audits by internal, external audits and other institutions. We should remember that there is the taxation audit. We should do something with this, not to have it in an absurdist way, just like there is one audit, both financial, taxational, etc. Not to have the absurdist situation, we should delve into the sense of the situation. I will start from the end. The report was based on as the derivative from another report, and probably derived from another report, something from Sigma, something from something else. And I should mention that you should check Compow's 2017 report, where the role of the internal audit is assessed and evaluated. And the financial inspection evaluation from 2013, there is much interesting to find. And now we have the initiative for Sigma to have the in-depth analysis and assessment of this audit system in Ukraine. For example, not to have the overlapping of the names, but we should compare the tools that are in place. It's speaking about the tools. Indeed, 4 types of activities as for audit. And to compare those types of audits, it's like comparing lunch and snack and barbecue. But monitoring by its nature, this is the short procedure that is prescribed in the legislation as for public procurements. And in fact, there we check the compliance as for the procedure, nothing more. Then another procedure as for the procurement. Then we have the order 631. It has another cycle. And comparing them is like comparing something sour and something wet. It was incorrect to my mind. If we go in depth into the audit of the revisions, these are another activities as for the financial control. Probably we could offer to check them together to find what are the differences, what is in common between those audit activities. We should understand what overlaps, what doesn't overlap. For example, what equivalent do we need to have some activities? What are the legal tools in place? And then we can come to the way we define what tool should be applied. And we have some limitations as for their tools, areas of it where they can be applied. We have some limitations for the range of the tools that can be used in some particular cases. We can offer to check another activities and events, and then have professional discussion, which will demonstrate what is the collision if it exists. And let's start probably with a presentation. The State Audit Service, as it was mentioned, it conducts something accordingly to what was assigned to it. This is the general principle of all of the executive bodies, because we all have some system of assigning. But if to go into depth of the procedures, the State Audit Service, as for revision, there is Order 319 or the planning structure. I was a part of this offering to update it. It mentions in the report that it works by itself, and that there is no sufficient justification. And I feel really sorry about this, because I feel as I was working on this, I believe it's underestimation of this tool. For example, checking some company, organization, maybe they have some vague contract with the individual interpreter. Probably it's someone calling, asking, wanting some checks. Probably it's a mess. We give the order to central apparatus, and we should have this plan of audits once it was possible to send a letter and saying check this on that. But now we try to get rid of this practice. In 2022, we have special card of planning, schedule of planning, 6 pages of the document, some hypotheses, information, the full list of questions to be considered, taken into consideration, to check whether correctly the audit or revision group was providing its activity, to check and not to have the situation. For example, we come to capital construction, and for example, this group checking this construction having no specialist as for building and construction. For example, sometimes we don't have enough resources for the audits. To avoid those situations, we should act this way. And we have this vice versa communication issue. If we plan for 1 year, Then how should we do it? We have some sustainable plans of procurements for a year to understand what monitoring should be conducted as for which activity, to have financing for this, but the monitorings are planned accordingly to the request and accordingly to the risk-oriented selection procedure, accordingly to the procedure prescribed. And before this meeting, we had the meeting with the World Bank. Now we are committed to increasing the number of monitorings that are based on the risk-oriented approach. But probably this another plan, and we can't have it for a year. Let's have the annual procurement plan, and then we could come to the revision of the audits. This is the flexible structure, and probably we now can plan quarterly. This is the flexible system when we understand that we have enough people, and we would understand that we have everything in place. I can have an example. When we were planning the first quarter of this year, we had one facility in planning, and this facility, understanding this object of the revision, subject to revision, seeing that it's in the monitoring list, and then the subject to monitoring has started disappearing, and they started closing their facility. They're subject to monitoring, and then we would come and there is no facility to check, there's no subject to monitoring. But taken, for example, a European institution, they have the analytical, for example, report, which they take into consideration, and then they have some prescribed procedures. So when having some reports, let's go into the depth of the planning, and those not planned revisions, not scheduled revisions, if we speak about them. Once we had a gap when the subject of control would come to a service saying, check me, please. And I understand why it happens. We have covered this gap after we have noticed that from one oblast we had two letters of this with this absolutely same copied content. It was just using different typing styles. But we need to have to see that gaps. We had this gap, but we have overcome this. But please, if you have some reports, some gaps in your report, so please come to us and we can fix it together. Competence, yes, indeed, we have a problem with this. It's present everywhere, and do you know how many people do you know you have encouraged to go to become state servants, to be the authority workers? Once it happened to me within the framework of the reforming of the state bodies. I was asked, do you believe that it can be reformed? I said yes, and I was told, yeah, go and reform. And then I have become a part of this. Then if we have more of such people, then we will have the complete staff. And for example, in Zakarpattia, it's interesting to people to work in trade, in economy, industries, rather than to come to this area where you can be you involved into some criminal activity, etc. Or some people from outside would say you are doing everything wrong and without any justification. And we have mentioned this as the state audit, taxation audit. We have mentioned this mandate, and let's probably decrease the state authorities, and then we can print money at home. And you remember the book by Verdel, and it was called the meeting point, when private banks would print the banknotes, and the role of the state was only to take some customs payments and fees from the people, and this was the only role of the people. So now we are a part of the Ukraine facility where there is the demand, and the strict demand from the EU, and this state finance, and with the EU Financial Control Service finds some violation, and then the budget will not get the full sum as for the future transfers. So it works this way. Just offering some recommendations. So let's be careful when we write any recommendations. We understand that we are not the perfect organization sometimes. We are open to dialogue, and maybe we could have a look what we should fix, what we should correct. We are trying to have the dialogue with another authorities. We communicate with the accounting chamber. We stay in touch and we cooperate with other bodies and authorities. But as for some recommendations, we should be careful. And we should be careful when checking whether it will work or not. With some of the simple materials offer that some of the inspections, some of the materials of the audit is not based on the internal audit activity. So we should be careful with the hypothesis. So many of the recommendations sometimes may, in a bad way, impact this society's point of view. For us not to have a thorough situation.
I want to announce how our agenda. We will have a couple of speakers more, and then I will give opportunity to the authors of the report to react to the speakers. Ivan Lakhtionov, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Projects Implementations. Ivan, what's your opinion about today's topic? You're monitoring procurements. Maybe you can add something to this topic just to be in time. Like, it's very interesting meeting. I missed another very important meeting, but like this one I was very interested in it. Yeah. Like after Dmitry's emotional speech, which I partially support, Mr. Yuriy said that it's better to prevent rather than post factum react. And indeed, today, the only institution that tries to act proactively, it's State Audit Service with the function of monitoring public procurements. Yes, that function is not ideal. Yes, 70% of monitoring is conducted. The agreement was already signed, but we should work on that, improve it. And a lot of things said in Sigma about decentralization, about decrease of the uh, level of authorities, but the discussion is going on about that decrease of authorities from the State Audit Service and providing these authorities to the accounting chambers. And it's important to say that accounting chamber wants to analyze local budgets, and our Western partner says that they should focus on procurements. My opinion, when State Audit Service was supposed to be reorganized or like disbanded, my opinion was that I am against this idea because I don't understand how efficient will be internal control system. I wanted to, like, based on today, I don't say it's a bad idea. I don't say that Sigma's conclusions are controversial or wrong. I just want to understand how it will practically work like today when we have to prove to our international partners that we have efficient financial control. During the full-scale war, we had not much changed in this area. So we are operating with tools that we had before, and when we now want to say that let's restrict the authority of the State Audit Service, I doubt that such initiatives, because I don't know how city council somewhere will internally audit themselves. Yes, I know I'm oversimplifying, but let's um, take into account current environment. Yes, there are pros and cons. Yes, I totally agree with risk-oriented approach. Yes, financial risks should be combined with internal control, but transition from centralization to decentralization of to in when we talk about internal control, maybe I, I, me and we all don't understand how it will work in practice. Show me any audit department where this was efficiently implemented. How the municipality company, the internal control department uh, will audit themselves efficiently. Yes, the issue of internal control is discussable because you are dependent from the supervisor, from the company management. So this issue is this has to be discussed. Like like focus on the monitoring of procurements. Uh, I've heard statement that mostly State Audit Service is conducting those checks. Like, there are like 4,000 procurements uh, finalized every day. Like it's not possible to cover all of them, and here we should apply risk-oriented approach. My next question is: we saw analytics on the work of State Audit Service, but can we say how many audits accounting chamber conducted in per year? 50. And State Audit Service, I saw the figure more than 10,000, revisions and monitoring. So we should uh, look at things in in relation to other functions. Like, yes, we thought that monitoring functions should belong independently to other departments. So there was a department, the Ministry of Economy, so a separate one, and that story didn't work out. Maybe uh, at some stage, State Audit Service became such an independent body, and there are things to improve there still, but uh, we need to think how that should work properly. And about the strategy of reforming public procurements. The strategy of public procurements is already approved, and we have there, in terms of control, only uh, uh, remark that a risk-oriented approach will be applied to the procurements. I will also question this approach because depending on how we will select procurements, uh, not always is relevant with what we will have as a final result. Because in many cases, auditors, mostly maybe 70, 80%, they can find some violations. There should be a focus on something. Uh, we need we have alternative opinion that we need to increase pressure from State Audit Service uh, by stopping payments. We are not supporting this idea because this will basically mean pressure on the customers and businesses. We have alternative suggestions to oblige State Audit Service to monitor procurements above 15 million hryvnia. So like uh, so like 100% monitoring, and everyone will understand that. And everything below this threshold, let's think about risk indicators. Yeah, we need to improve. They are outdated because procurements are changing, and we should work on those updated risk indicators. Just Miss Roksolana already left, but she said very important phrase. Indeed, responsibilities should be separated. Yes, we all agree to that. Both accounting chamber and state audit service, they are in consensus on that. Yes, I'm finishing. Uh, but we not should not only simplify the control and monitoring, because it's about efficient spending of budget funds, which are if we will delegate to Ministry of Defense a task to find procurement of X by 17 hryvnia. I doubt that will work. Very, very interesting opinion. Now I want to pass the floor to Martyna Bohuslavets, Executive Director and founder of CSO Institute of Legislative Ideas. Thank you. I will speak less than 5 minutes. I was very I a lot of resonated what I've heard from Ivan Lakhtionov from Transparency Ukraine. Yes, I agree with that opinion. And indeed, I want to talk about very practical case on how we cooperate with State Audit Service on in last 2 months on the control of funds when allocated for reconstruction of residential property. And during our last trip with Rice Coalition, and I'm a newly appointed head of Rice Coalition, but just in Brussels, we were assured in European Commission, and Mr. Olaf understands that State Audit Service is the key body of internal financial control of the state that will conduct the preliminary checks and will do reports on rebuilding construction facilities. And when we understand that this is the only body that can check local budgets, that's why I selected this case. When we said about restricting authorities of State Audit Service, I will I will give you an example how local authorities, how law enforcement authorities themselves restrict their such audit authorities, because already we were auditing use of the funds of user funds for liquidation of aftermath of armed aggression, and we found excess budgeting of funds for the building at Soborny Avenue. So the excess of budgeting was by 14 million hryvnia for certain infrastructure building. So we sent request to the Eastern office, to the Central office, and with the request to conduct monitoring, and the East Center replied that it's not possible to conduct it. We then spoke with the Central Office of the SU, and then they agreed to conduct the audit of the budgeting renovations by Zaporizhia city councils. And the time for the audit was agreed by January. We received an official reply that auditors were not allowed physically to attend that facility. So the city council company didn't allow auditors to conduct the audit. Then State Audit Service filed a report to National Police on obstruction their activities. And it's important that as of today, the case wasn't opened. If we will compare, if we'll do an analogy of a pie, and in the middle we have a state authority of a state audit authority service that as an only body that can check regional governments. Some at the bottom we have city council companies that don't allow auditors to such facilities, and on the top we have a law enforcement that is not prosecuting such actions. So we need to clearly appoint people responsible for such events that happened in Zaporizhia. The key conclusion from my example is that before assessing the work of the certain body like State Audit Service, about on terms of quantity of audits, a number of staff, about the authorities, about how to restrict the authorities, how to transfer authorities to other bodies. We want to draw your attention to the fact that how these authorities already been restricted by external factors, and sooner than later we will move to the new law on State Audit Service, and I would love to see that these changes will contain a holistic approach for us to properly put down responsibility for not allowing auditors to conduct the audit. Yes. And if we will further restrict further authorities of the SU in other things, it won't be capable, it won't be able to be functional. I would like to ask all participants to be on time according to the time's allocations. I want to pass the floor to Jenny Lundmark, head of the sector of state finance management. Jenny, do you hear us?
I do.
The floor
do
is
you hear
yours.
me? Thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to give a very short remark to this very interesting discussion. I'm very impressed by the number of people you've managed to put together. And I think it's the first sort of comprehensive discussion I hear with representatives of all relevant institutions on internal controls in Ukraine. So congratulations. Also, congratulations to the researchers for what I thought sounds like a very thorough piece of work. I look forward to reading this in more detail and would also love to follow it up with you. I think from the discussion that it's very important to make a distinction between financial inspections and audits. This is not the same thing. And the State Audit Service does financial inspections primarily. The AKU does audits. And then for me, the difference is that the State Audit Service will exactly do what you just explained, Martyna. You know, they go, they check, they inspect. The result of this is, yeah, you will maybe recover some money, which is fine and which is needed in Ukraine, for sure. But with an audit, if it's done right, and I agree with you that we are still not there, then it will be more forward-looking. It will give recommendations that will change systems, that will support reforms in Ukraine. And this is what you have the accounting chamber for. This is their core mandate. They have to do audits according to international standards. And I agree, they do many other things right now. but when the reform is done, this is where they should be, right? And then I think when the system starts to work and when the trust is built between the public and AKU and the internal auditors, which are very important, stakeholder in this whole control system. I just want to put one comment on the internal audit because I had the pleasure to spend the whole day with representatives of internal audits in Ukraine. So if you want to see an example of an internal audit that works, I think I would recommend to go to the Ministry of Defense. This is just, they seem to be completely on the ball and know what they're doing. And this is an area that has undergone tremendous reform in Ukraine since 2014. So it is a system that's working. But of course, it's also a system where we really don't know much, right? Because it's not really a system that we talk about a lot. And that's my final point. I'm very happy that we are now actually talking about internal controls in Ukraine. And this, let's keep it up. And have a discussion as open as possible. And please don't ever hesitate to come and talk directly to me if you like. on our recommendations in the enlargement report, of course, and chapter 32 on internal controls. Thank you.
And once again, we've heard what Ms. Roksolana has mentioned. We are on the first stages of financial control. Very many modernizations are to take place. And now I would like to give it over to our colleagues in maybe under 5 minutes because we have very little time. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for this opportunity to present. And I have a couple of things to mention. And as for reform, take into consideration the way we are communicating, the way our European colleagues mentioned this. So the question of the State Audit Service is something very up to date. It's the window of the opportunity. And take into consideration the activity of the committee, we should adopt the legislation and we should improve our draft law as for the mandates. And we should improve our legislation definitely. And with this, we should use this opportunity. We should understand this. And to be honest, between the society, in the society, there is no united single vision of the reform of the accounting chamber of the State Audit Service, the way they should look like. And I know that the accounting chamber need to start monitoring the local budgets. It's not so much within the constitution of Ukraine, so we yet the way we are right now. We have what we have right now, and as I can see, Europe emphasizes on the accounting chamber, and here the State Audit Service losing as for some priorities. So we should understand what should be the major body of the audit, because in Ukrainian realities, to my mind, State Audit Service is more efficient and should have a broader mandate. I have an example. We are the NGO that has been very active for 10 years. We have been monitoring different risks and different public procurements. And when we submit some letters to the State Audit Service or the Accounting Chamber, they say, one day we will include this your point into our control in this schedule, and a year in it too, we can get the answer and the reply. And so we do not expect to have the good results because, for example, if we have some exaggerated numbers in tender, but if we get the reply in a year or two, then it makes no sense. So if we can see some prices, some exaggerated, some too high, too expensive prices, our goal is to save our money in the budget. And our goal is to inform this to auditors. And when the auditors join the specialists from the law enforcement to have some criminal prosecutions to solve the issue, to involve them to this monitoring, whether it could be some damage to the budget, for example, some tender offer, etc. And during tenders, we should understand what we can physically use. And now, when preparing another materials, what experience can be used. And improving the capacity of the bodies and authorities. And I'm going to speak about the State Audit Service primarily. Let's be objective. The 16,000 service salary of the State Audit Service worker, we will definitely see some deficiency, understaffing because of such low salary or wage. And today we have been speaking of the salaries of the accounting chamber, but we have not discussed this as for the State Audit Service. And as far as I understand, to improve the accounting service conditions as for the workers and to improve their salaries, the finances are influxing from the State Audit Service, and the State Audit Service is drained as for the salary. That is why they have such poor conditions. And I should mention that 50 billion hryvnia that will be requested. We should control the way those finances are spent or how they are allocated as for the areas of the budget, and take into consideration our decentralization reform. We should highlight monitoring those prices that are exaggerated, that are too high. We should focus on them. And the last question to accounting chamber, we should understand how to use. Have you tracked the results of your audit reports in practice? Ideally, what you have elaborated, something you have found out as a result of the audit, then you should imply this in practice. Well, do the members of the parliament read your findings? Do they look through them? Or you maybe submit your results to the law enforcement authorities for them to take this into consideration? We should understand whether it's useful or not. And sometimes NGOs are said, like, you NGOs write reports, but you do nothing. So I have the controversial thesis as well. We can see the reports and of the accounting chamber, but we cannot see the results. So we can send this thesis to the accounting chamber. Probably we should improve the situation to understand how to use reports very efficiently. Thank you so much. I really like the Aspen format, 2 minutes, and then your microphone is off. I don't have this button to mute you. I'd love to have it. Even even our representatives cannot meet these time limits. So it's over to you, just 30 seconds. And nice question. I mentioned this today, the monitoring of decision fulfillment. We have this system. We are trying to adapt this system, adopt it. And now we analyze whether the recommendations of the accounting chamber within the latest 6 years have been implemented, whether they have been taken into consideration and whether it impacted the activities. And now we have this procedure prescribed in the legislation. As for the accounting chamber, we should understand the functions of the accounting chamber. It should not analyze, let's say, so it shouldn't run after the findings, trying to catch those findings. We should analyze globally the situation, offer and give the proposals, offers, suggestions, what the subject to control should do for this not to happen in the future, for this to be fixed for the future. This is another level what we should focus on, not find. Definitely, we should find the facts, but not just state the fact. Like, here's the fact, go to the law enforcement. No, it's not functional. So the functionality of the accounting chamber to find the reason why it happens, why it was possible. Thank you so much. And I would like to give it over to, and I would like to add, the salary is not 16,000. The system of the wage counting is different. So 27,000 hryvnia is the salary. So you're welcome to join. And as for the prices, it's a huge challenge. And definitely we should work upon the legislation on price and in cost formation. So we should understand whether the tractor was purchased or some equipment was purchased accordingly to the market prices. So we should be very strict with this. And I would like to emphasize timing. We're now running out of time. Please just stay with us for more than an hour and a half, please. We would like to listen to everyone who would like to present, to everyone who's present. We would like to give it over to all of the participants to reflect upon what was mentioned, to the authors, in particular, those who created that report and recently appointed. We have very many people who were recently appointed, who are present today, and your ideas as for the research. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for this research. Thank you for invitation. And I totally agree with my colleagues who were commenting. And I would like to come to this point from another point, with another perspective during the discussion. I have such a rhetoric question that correlates with the naming of our event. What are the criteria to assess, evaluate the final product? How are we going to assess and evaluate the efficiency of implementation? Maybe not the efficiency of implementation, but how we're going to control the reporting of the State Audit Service and the accounting chamber. How can we understand that those reports are comprehensive? What are the evaluation and assessment criteria? If we have the legislation in place, all of the recommendations are in place, what are the criteria of evaluating the efficiency of the activity? What are we going to have here? And I have a huge question to those who has conducted this research and the audit of the State Audit Service as for using the finances of the fund of COVID-19 and the way their finances were allocated. As far as I remember, some of the points of the report, and among those points, there was the idea Ukravtodor, who received almost the highest amount of the allocations from this fund. There were no violations as for usage of those finances. It does not correlate with what was happening in media. And I have the same question. How efficient is this report? What is the consequence of this report? There were no violations indicated, but in media, we can see like the finances were abused, and we have the roads, the centimeter one, for example. And I have a question, the following. How can the society assess all the reports if this reporting is not always provided? For example, I have it from my practice once with our colleagues. We wanted to assess a Queenska territorial community. We tried to evaluate the way the finances are allocated, but the State Audit Service refused us the access to this information, and they said these are the materials used in the criminal proceedings. But I don't understand how can the whole report can be a part of the criminal proceeding. Why isn't it a kind of a public information? Why are they not publicated on the website? Why cannot the civil society read this report? Why should we submit the request to read, to get the permission to read and have a look through this information? 20 seconds to answer, to reply. And the Criminal Code of Ukraine, Article 222. And you, as the civil society, can give a trigger, can push us and say that it's required. As if we speak about Ukravtodor, it was audited last year, and the materials of audit and there was the audit of Ukravtodor, and there were revisions of some other units of Ukravtodor parts. It was within this framework of this audit, and that was the question. And there was the act concluded that these checks did not happen, for example, in Ivano-Frankivsk, Rivne Oblast, and it was written that it should occur this year. We should communicate with each other. We have very many questions to each other. Olena Makeyeva, the chief of the Department of Analytics of the Institute of Analytics and Advocacy. I know that you had some work in place as for the analytics, as for the reports. Do you have something to add? Thank you, Alexandra. I have the answer to some of the questions of Serhiy. For example, the recommendations of accounting chamber been fulfilled completely or not. But not to take your time, I would like to emphasize on the following two major points. First point, we have been tracking the activity of the accounting chamber since 2018, I believe. And since then, this is probably the first time when the accounting chamber in its reforming has been so focused on. And the legislators have been paying so much attention to this. And we definitely appreciate this, because the role of this body is underestimated among the members of the parliament and among the subjects of to control. And we have been also surveying the subjects to control. They are afraid definitely of this authority. So coming back to the results of findings of our previous research, 3 years have passed since the document was publicated. And today, listening to presentation of Viktor and Ms. Olena, I have now, like in a time machine, I came back 3 years ago, and those recommendations come back to my mind. As for the recommendations and the reports of the accounting chamber, they should be practical. They should be measurable. They should have some terms of fulfillment, and I can give you some digits. If we don't have the accuracy in the recommendations, we have the research among about 1,200 recommendations. Only 50% of the recommendations were measurable. And 97% of them were realistic, and 99% of the recommendations had no time limitations. And what did we have at the end? The subjects to audit reply, we will consider this, we'll take this into consideration, we did it, we have taken it into consideration, we will include this to our plan, and so on. So it did not facilitate some actual results, so the allocated finances to be spent and allocated in a proper way. So he is right that the European Union and Western countries rely more on the accounting chamber. They know how to work with this authority. They have the analogy of the accounting chamber in their countries, and they have high trust credit to accounting chamber, what is not the case in Ukraine. In most cases, people don't know that the accounting chamber exists, what it does. It is not the question, the issue to the accounting chamber. That's the question to communication, liaison team, and the question to our educational system as well. So thank you so much, the authors of the research. Thank you so much, the organizers. It's a great discussion, very interesting. I really support the accounting chamber. And I believe that the reforming will be successful. We will finish with the report, and this legislation will be finished and successful. It will be successful. And I would like also to reflect myself. The reforms cannot ever finish. They should be ongoing. And I would like to give it over to Kirill Klimenko. And Kirill, as Dmytro said, go and do yourself. So I got to know Kirill, who was the representative of the civil society, had some ideas how to reform the accounting chamber. Now Kirill is the member of the accounting chamber. He joined the chamber recently. And how is it different when you say you should reform and when you implement those reforms? And your insights as for what you've heard. Thank you so much for your trust. As I was, as wise people say, if you offer something, give your own example, be the role model that it's possible to implement something. So it's time to gather and to scatter the stones. Now it's time to collect the stones. So it's time for the transformation for the accounting chamber. Now I'm inside of this institution, and my expectations are the same. We should implement the reforms. Nothing is impossible. If we have the dialogue, if we work openly, then we should explain the logic of what is going on. Then all the rest from a side will find it easier to understand where we are going. And today's discussion was around the transformation of the accounting chamber. And this year, definitely we will live in those global transformational processes because the accounting chamber members now these are their last days on their positions. We have the elections as for the new representatives and new members for the accounting chamber. We have new areas of the activities. We have some technical divisions, or technically some areas should be divided into some units and so on. And it was mentioned that we have some understaffing as it should be. Now we work upon having the opportunity to employ people who are going to work accordingly to the new standards, who will implement the activity accordingly to the international standards. And we have the working group, and we should have the legal base for the activity of the accounting chamber. We need the financial resource as well. And using this financial resource, we can involve people, motivate them, and maybe direct them, train them. As for the quality of the reports of the accounting chamber, we had some role models, really nice samples of the reports. We worked with our vis-a-vis in European countries, just like the audit of how to use the finances as for the apply the finances as for Chernobyl. And we had the constant working groups, those permanent working groups. And as for how to act in case of the catastrophe, we had some emergency plans and so on. We have some records. We should develop this. As for the risks, when planning and when implementing those reports or fulfilling those reports recommendations, it's easy to say when you're from a side and you can recommend something, and then the social vision and the risks that can appear, they have their own vision. We are ready to communicate with our auditor specialists. We are ready to communicate with the people. We are ready to consider all of the risks that might exist. We can try to evaluate them and then use them in our practice. So because we need your support as well, though, then to implement those recommendations that we're going to elaborate together. The first rule of auditor is to have trustworthy relations. It's my personal goal as of the member of the accounting chamber to change the point of view of the subjects to the audit for those of subjects to the audit to consider the accounting chamber and the State Audit Service not as the punishing body, but as the body that does its work. So thank you so much for this opportunity to join this discussion. We are open to dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I will pass the floor to Viktor. Yeah. But you reminded me on the phrase that Olena says that population is not aware about accounting chamber. Unfortunately, not every MP know about accounting chamber. That's from what we should start education. I want to briefly give floor to Viktor to reflect on certain comments and give a short answer from the colleague how you measure the efficiency of the work of the accounting chamber, and then I will give floor to Olena in order for you to be able to answer to question on how to measure efficiency of the accounting chambers. I wasn't planning to talk about methodology. It's time to with time the methodologies will be publicized. The only indicator that I constantly measured back in 2019 is trust. Yes, there should be a very clear methodology, not as it was done in recently published documents where it was said that the level of trust to accounting chamber like without methodology and stuff, but that's not relevant. The key points I wanted to say that the main focus is not just like sorry for analogy. It's not to smack in face accounting chamber. Just want to highlight the challenges because these challenges are the opportunities for the accounting chamber in futures that will help you to build better institution in future. You are in a very difficult situation, extremely difficult. I'm not sure people who are present here understand fully in what difficult situation you are working, politically wise, organizationally wise, staffing wise, value wise. Yes, I wish you all the best and I wish you success and I wish that you build up trust to your institution and that people would trust your reports. And I'm very glad to the reaction of the representatives of the accounting chambers when you mentioned that you will be building up trust, including from the civil society. I'm only very I'm also very pleased with the reaction of the speakers. And number one, I did a comment. So like initially that we need to read this presentation together with the report because unfortunately it's not published yet because it contains a lot of interesting information. Another thing is on decentralization. We need to enhance efficiency of internal control departments, and we need to decrease the pressure of financial control of State Audit Service. And when so we underestimate the importance of the function of internal control. So we have to learn art of dialogue, because when two experts meet and they have opposite opinions, apparently both sides should listen to each other. And I want to personally talk to Mr. Dmytro about. I want to say that I'm certified auditor, and COSO concept and 5 key principles is things that I'm now practically applying, and in order like to not to like in order for the internal audit departments would not allow procurements of overpriced goods. And for me, I'm very sure that if you will find time, we will be very glad to continue our dialogue, because we will have a lot of topics to discuss, both on State Audit Service and on internal control and internal audit. I believe this discussion will be very efficient, and I will finish with the words of Jenny, because I'm very pleased that we have this amount of experts and participants, that we are all together, can listen to each other, and that's a big start for further reforms. Thank you for this event, for the opportunity to discuss issues and to listen to each other. I want to say again words of thanks for joining us in such a swift manner, and for being so precise on this topic. And we will continue such discussions, as Roksolana mentioned. We will not speak about State Audit Service without State Audit Service. Yes, we're very glad that representatives from both DASU and Accounting Chamber are with us, because we are all on the same side. We want to build a resilient and sustainable Ukraine, and for this we need strong institutions. And this is where financial audit and control bodies should um, follow the efficiency of funds spent. Thank you very much to all participants. For those who are offline, we have coffee break, and just to finalize, let's not mix together different types of audits. Yeah, just not to create false impression on among the citizens. Like we are financial control body, and Accounting Chamber is a parliament control institutions. Yes, and maybe for example, if we will have management accountability and everyone will listen to the audit reports, maybe we will be at that stage when the role will be decreased. But this requires a proper environment. Dear colleagues, when we conduct certain, like for example, strategic sessions, yes, like initially we draw our destination point, yes, and then we start building up the path how to achieve that. Yes, I think Miss Olena doesn't saying that tomorrow the SU should be like disbanded or the authorities should be decreased. I know. I I I maybe know 20 web pages that will have very controversial headlines. Like we so like we, one politician said that he can do reforms very fast, but they're not yet be implemented. Yes, so like, and we thank you for this comment. With this, yes, of course, we need to implement changes according to European acquis in order our regulations be in line with European. We all hope for and aspire for membership in EU, and